Welcome once again to Syntax Error, your pretentious philosophical pedantic podcast ostensibly about video gaming and related topics therein. Warning, this podcast contains mature language, content, and spoilers. You have been warned.
Welcome back to Syntax Error, and we're doing our obligatory Bioshock episode for this season. This time around, we have, I at least stumbled across a series of books that are written with pop culture things in mind and tying them to philosophy. So this one, of course, is called Bioshock and Philosophy, subtitle Irrational Game, Rational Book, which is somewhat punny, but all right. So we're going to focus on 4 articles from this book that are the book is divided into 4 sections, and we'll go through each of them. And I, of course, if I haven't mentioned, am Scott Thurlow, joined tonight by Jane and Manzer.
Hello, I'm certainly a parasite.
You definitely are, always have been. Chris Morgan.
Good evening. I have nothing else to add.
All right, and Stephen Amosi.
Hello.
Alrighty, so the first one is, I guess I'll say the title and talk about it before I get into like the actual nitty-gritty. The first essay is titled Bioshock's Meta-Narrative, What Bioshock Teaches the Gamer About Gaming by Collin, Pointon. So basically, we've sort of referenced this on a couple other episodes where this is an introductory kind of essay, where like the issue is that as gamers and also as narrative analysis, we know it's obvious to us what the meta-narrative, in quotes, of Bioshock is. But it's the very first essay in the book, and so I think it's just, you sort of peripherally have to cover it. It points out the crux of, yes, the moment in which you learn that your character, in fact, has been controlled is a moment in which you ostensibly realize that you're being controlled in every video game you ever played.
Right, it's the are you a man or are you a slave question.
And you're obviously a slave. Like, there's no real, there's no debate about it, really.
Yeah.
But the thing is, you have to sort of realize it.
But I want to make a debate about it.
Okay. Obviously. We'll become men.
Yes. I think that this essay sort of misses the point of the slave and a man and the choice involved in games.
Okay, go on.
Because the purpose of games is often to controlled chaos. It's the idea of allowing the player to feel that they have a lot of choice, but then they don't really. It's sort of a kind of smoke and mirrors. Mm-hmm. It's all about the illusion of choice.
Yes.
Whereas Bioshock is straight up telling you, not that you're a slave necessarily, but because it's not throwing in your face. It's not, the big reveal isn't as a slave. Big reveal of a game saying to you that we're going to take away all the smoke and mirrors and just show you exactly what you're doing, which is pressing a button because we put on the screen a button. Sure. This is the base realism of a game. There is no choice involved with it. Every choice you have is, again, it's never been, and I think that the point he's making in this is that he's seeing what the issue is, but he's taking the wrong message out of it.
All right. I mean, I guess I see what you're saying, but again, like, it sort of speaks to the fact that we're us and we've been doing what we're doing for a while. So yeah, that point seems obvious, but I think like you have to be sort of presented with that fact at first, and then you can sort of delve into whether or not you think it's that deeply or not, etc., like, or how much of an impact it may have.
I believe it was him. It may have been in one of the other ones where he's talking about the reward system. And one thing he didn't really address is that, because it is kind of like a operant conditioning kind of thing. I mean, because look at it. It's just like, what keeps you, he even said himself, what keeps you looking around? Because you want to get more goodies, more ammo, some kind of, to divert to Fallout. You've got like the bobbleheads. I mean, amongst other things that you're collecting. So it is it's conditioning on a lot of different ways. I mean,
sure.
It's just like it's a reward system on every level, whether your character needs like more ammo, needs better armor, wants to get this collectible, unless you're like Ubisoft and just inundate the whole thing where you just don't even care anymore. So it's like, I see both of your points that kind of lie in the middle, because I think this actually probably could have been, I agree at the end. I think he scratched the surface on this one, but he brought up a lot of good points, but he didn't like really go into a lot of them.
Right. To that point, I would say that all of these essays, while they are interesting and get you thinking more about it, I don't think any of them are
not
designed
like
to be,
mind-blowing. Yes.
Well, that's true. Like, if you have read anything about Bioshock, which all of us have read something about Bioshock, to some degree, you already are familiar with this concept.
Yes, exactly.
But to a larger degree, I don't think that any of these essays really go as deep into it as they could. And
Right.
and that's a function
As I
of
would
how
like.
short they have to be.
We'll do it,
And-
of course, but
Right.
go on.
That's a function of how short the essays are and what they could fit into this book, I think.
But even more so to that point, Scott, you brought this up earlier, that a number of the essays to come will be much more focused than this one was.
Yeah.
This was taking
It's a
a
broad
pretty
overview.
well-established argument over the nature of choice in video games and does a cursory glance at it, and basically to set up, I feel, what the rest of the book is about.
Right.
I was going to say the one that felt the most focused was the one about the propaganda. To me, that felt like it was the most focused.
We'll get to that one shortly.
No,
So-
no, I didn't want to jump ahead,
Sure.
but I was going to just say that I agree with him for the most part.
Yeah, so like I'll just give two quick excerpts from this first one, where he writes, Bioshock shatters the meta-narrative of the player, enacting personal gameplay choices. In a role-playing game, like those of Bioshock, Halo, Half-Life, because they're examples, players cannot customize avatar, etc. They must play a specific character in the narrative of the game, but there remains some sense of freedom and personal choice. However, the self-reflection that Bioshock produces leads to a realization of the limitations of such RPGs. The player has very little freedom of choice in Bioshock, because if they were not to choose as Atlas does, etc., then there would be no more narrative to experience.
Right.
Which, yes, is all like, it's true on the surface, and you guys are all right. Like, yeah, we understand that, but it sort of like has to lay that out to sort of delve deeper into more nuanced things as later essays get to. But yeah, I just felt like sort of like we're obliged to cover this one because, yeah, that's the thing that Bioshock is known for. That's what it does. And even though we're aware of that, yes, we've read and studied more deeply these kind of things. Nevertheless, though, you have to take that as a given in order to explore it more fully.
I think that's true. I think that so perhaps getting away from that a little bit, I think one of the interesting things that this essay explores is the hermeneutic horizon,
Yes.
as it's called.
And indeed, yes, he brings that in. Yep.
And I think what's really interesting about that is the fact that they discuss the idea that games are an expansion of your self, of the self. Like games, anything that you can really look at as part of the way that you view the world becomes an extension of yourself. And the way that Bioshock, and I think what it's trying to say is the way that Bioshock makes you look at the world is like an expansion of your own view on gaming.
Yes.
In and of itself.
that's
and the idea
that's
that
maybe
if,
a better point
if
than
you are,
the rest of it.
yeah, exactly. If you are a slave, then that's an extension of, like, that's a learned idea for you that you get out of this game. And the fact that if you are, quote unquote, a slave to the game, it's not because this game made you a slave to the game. It's because you have always been a slave to all games,
just
which
never
are an
realized
expansion
it.
of yourself.
Yeah.
But this is telling you that and expanding your horizons in that way.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, and I want to get into argument with the guy who wrote
Yes,
this.
of course you do.
Really?
But like, I get it.
Collin, what's his name? Collin.
Collin Pointon, yes.
Steve, get him on the horse.
I'll get him on the horn. We'll get him on the horn. We'll have a little conversation.
Like, I was saying, I see what you mean about that, but it's just like we're sort of compelled to cover it. But we'll go on shortly thereafter. Chris, if you have something else to say.
I was going to say the interesting thing, and I was actually discussing this with some random guy at the restaurant when I was picking up dinner tonight, was the fact that as I've said before, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, so my first experience with video games, the only things that gave you a choice were the text-based video games.
Sure.
And that my first experience with a narrative, like as a first-person shooter, was Resident Evil 2, and anything else you can get on the PlayStation 1 that was okay. And when Beth and I moved in, she's the one who brought the Xbox, and she bought me this game. So I actually had to restart this game because I myself was learning.
Because you suck at games. Go on.
Yeah, well, that too.
That's a low blow.
No, but like it's like you guys were more into the fold of video games
Sure.
than I was.
Sure.
And here I was like kind of learning the new narrative, the way things were done now, as opposed to, the more sophisticated storytelling, the more sophisticated dialogue, gameplay, the whole kit and caboodle. I actually had to restart it because I felt like I talked to Scott and I'm like, I'm missing some shit.
You weren't playing Pong anymore, that's for sure.
Well, yeah, but I mean,
Gotta level up.
even I had progressed beyond Pong. I'm just saying that
All
this
right.
was this was really mind blowing for me. And I thought it was funny that he brought up Halo because I had played Halo before that. And to me, Halo isn't complicated. The first Halo isn't complicated at all. And this one was a much more complicated game on every level. So
Yeah.
the first time I played it, a lot flew by me, but now as an experienced gamer playing with a lot of stuff, all the stuff means a lot more to me now than it did then.
All right, I grew up with all of this kind of. I grew up with Half-Life. I grew up with Halo. All of those games that came before. And that's the thing is that when you look at like System Shock 2, which was a predecessor to Bioshock.
Did you play System Shock 2?
Yes.
Oh my god, I had never heard of it until way after I played Bioshock.
It had a twist ending, which turns out the basically it was the Atlas ending from Bioshock. Which turns out the person you're following is
the big bad.
The big bad all along. So in Bioshock, the realization wasn't that, oh, I know, I grown up with Half-Life. I know my character's making choices that have ludonarrative dissonance I know that there is often, for the sake of narrative, poor choices that go into it. And I don't think it is as necessarily clever of a twist as a lot of people philosophically.
I mean, it may not be,
because if you were into the gaming as much as I was, the idea that there's little choice involved in gaming
is more obvious. Yes, sure.
It is. There's if else statements, and you choose one or you choose the other, and generally they lead to the same path.
I mean, I thought that, especially like in retrospect, looking at it, that, the meta narrative of it, but what was really funny was I found the biggest, when I played, Burial at Sea, Beth came out. She's like, I want to see you when you get to this point in the game, come and get me out. Cause actually she played the games in reverse. She played Infinite, then she played Burial at Sea, and then she played the first Bioshock. So she's in the other room playing Bioshock, and she goes, come get me when you get to this point.
But go on.
And, so when it got to the point where you find out that you have come full spoiler, that you've come it's a closed time loop. Yeah. That it is a closed time loop. That to me was like mind blowing, because she's like, she hadn't gotten to the end of it, but she kind of knew the crux of everything. And she came in to see my reaction to it. And when I found out, you find out like the would you kindly, I like, basically dropped my controller, my eyes wide up. Like, to me, that was the most awesome revelation.
Well, that was the introduction of like the meta narrative into gaming,
this medium.
And like it wasn't really done that I had known before I played this game.
LucasArts games,
to an extent, for sure, but not in this way.
Not in this
way,
right? Yeah.
And that revelation that the player's actions made no difference, and the fact that they were commenting upon that was a really interesting thing that happened in this game. And it's something that sticks with you. The more you think about the game, you're like, oh, yeah, that's right. They were talking about one thing, but they really meant this thing about me as a person.
Sure. It was a maturation of games, I guess I want to say. And that was a big milestone for the medium.
I guess my point was like the biggest reveal that I think, the meta narrative's cool, but to me, the strongest aspects of Bioshock was the short storytelling.
Sure.
And when you found out it was a time loop, that to me was much more of a...
It became more impactful in a sense.
Yeah, because, great storytelling, meta narrative commentary aside, great storytelling in any medium. How many times do we say, you gotta watch the show, the writing's so great? All of a sudden saying the writing is so great is like the exception and not the rule anymore.
Sure. No, that'll make sense. So, it all leads into, again, you sort of, have to take all that as a groundwork. If you're not familiar with it, you need it to go into something like the next essay, which is, has a great reference, Bioshock as Plato's Cave, like the famous example of that, by Roger Travis. And he leads off with a rather strong statement. And actually, this one, even having known as much, or having researched and being a big fan, and so forth, of the philosophy and analysis of Bioshock, he says this. The moment that your inactivity with the game is revealed as a fake is not the moment when you kill Irrational in the cutscene. It's what happens after that. When Atlas tells you to abort the self-destruct sequence and tacks on an extraneous would you kindly, at that point you can run around the office, shooting at the walls, looking at stuff, jumping up and down, all to your heart's content. But you have to still obey Atlas, and that sort of got to me.
Yeah. Yes, but theoretically, I could make an argument called Mario and the Sisyphus.
Yes, you said that to me earlier, and yes, that's valid. Go
Which
on.
is the idea is I could sit there as Mario and play Mario 1,000 times, having Mario save the same princess 1,000 times in the same castles, or I can have him sit there and die as the timer runs out. In a sense,
but the
it's
timer
same
never
kind-
runs out in this game. That's the point. That's
Yeah.
the whole point of this, is that,
Exactly.
and I think this is said, and I wrote this down. You, and I put in capital letters, may not fail to abort the self-destruct sequence.
Then may I
You
give
may not
another
fail.
example?
You're not allowed to.
I forget which Final Fantasy it is, but it's one of the early Final Fantasies, which you can say no to your first quest. And that's where "but thou must."
No, it's from
Comes
Dragon
from-
Warrior.
Oh, it's
That's
from
where
Dragon
it's
Warrior?
from. Yeah.
Actually, then the Final Fantasy one is, or you can actually end the game by
Yeah.
Dragon Warrior, "but thou must." Theoretically, this is the modern day version of "but thou
No,
must."
you're right about that. I mean, that's
it is.
it's true
but
at the
it's
end
even
of the day.
It's even stronger than that. You don't even have that choice. You can't
Yeah.
can't like choose something else, and then somebody says, "But you have to." You are not allowed to choose anything else. You don't even have that
yeah,
option.
it's stronger
You
than
know?
that. So like,
It's this. You can run around. You can shoot stuff in this room. You can do whatever the hell you want. But at the end of the day, you can either turn off the game or do
Or do
what
what it
they
tells
tell you
you.
to do.
Yeah.
But isn't that but the argument then? Isn't that every game though?
Yes,
Can you
but that
always
is
make the choice?
But that's the argument that they're making in this
yeah,
game.
that's
is
what
the
they're
fact
highlighting,
that
of course.
you
I
have
wish-
to do that in every game, but they just don't make it as obvious. In every
I wish
game.
I'd done that for both Dying Light and its DLC. When I read this, when I read that passage, it's like, oh, you can go fuck around with Andrew Ryan. I kept thinking, oh my God, somebody should have modded it so you can go through his desk and see his porn stash and,
Yeah.
and see his liquor cabinet and his, prescription drugs. I'm like sitting here thinking, God, but there's nothing else to do in
What
there.
does
Of
Andrew Ryan
course-
drink? No, like, all right, so I'll give you an actual excerpt from it to the points you guys are both just making. It's different and unique because of the way Bioshock contextualizes it. Because of the precise way all the other choices are foreclosed. With the words of Andrew Ryan ringing in your ear, his dying words, a man chooses, a slave obeys. The player, who feels him or herself to be a slave, nevertheless must obey.
Mhm.
So, that's why I picked this one out, because that got to me, even, as I said, even having discussed this thing a lot, the meta-narrative, in quotes, that we've always discussed a lot and did an episode on last season, that moment, the little nuance about that got to me.
May I make a counter that we're more a slave to the need for narrative closure?
Yeah.
I think,
And
but
that
I think
is-
I
that's
think that's true
I
as
think
well.
that's what it plays off.
Yeah,
of.
and that's
And,
what they're also commenting upon, I would argue for as well.
you know,
in a
like
sense.
you are gonna feel as a gamer, as a player, that you are not a slave, and you want to reject that. However, this game makes it very clear that you are a slave to playing this game, and I guarantee that the level of the amount of people that put the game down and never played it again at that point was very, very low. I guarantee that most 99% of gamers that got to that point in the game
You would bet that.
pressed
this
that
would say,
button and moved on in the game and made that point
Out of
for the
sheer
game.
Curiosity.
Does it matter? It's not out of
Yes,
curiosity.
because you're
It's
not-
because you can't. No, you could be theoretically in real life. If we were in real life, you could make a choice out of curiosity. You could curiously go another way about it. But the fact remains that this game makes you make the choice as a quote unquote slave to it. That if you want to know more, you have to do this, and everybody does that.
No, it's true. Let's just give one more line. To your point, E. The narrative that comprises the universe and the universe that comprises the narrative both must have the sequence aborted as an inevitable feature.
This essay also talks about the little sisters. I'm
Yeah, it
sorry,
mentions
Chris, did
them.
you have another point to make on this before I go into that?
No, I was just going to say something about Ian, we have this craving for narrative closure. And I was thinking about movies Sales Limbo or, Jim Jarmusch, a couple of his films
Yeah.
where they've got indeterminate endings, where these are basically slice of life films, or where the purpose was to kind of let you fill in the rest of the gaps.
Like The Lobster, let's say.
I didn't see Lobster.
Check out that episode.
Let's just
though.
pick a random movie that we might have talked about earlier tonight.
Lobster was terrible.
That was great.
But I was also thinking about in video games, you really can't do that because of the reward system, because of that,
Sure.
you do need for video games. I think you're right. I think for you are obligated to have narrative closure, that you get to the end of this game and
More so than otherwise, my
Yeah,
opinion.
'cause
I don't know
in
if that's true. I think you can pull off the same type of open-ended ending in a video game that you can in a movie if you do it right.
Didn't Infinite do that?
I didn't finish
kind
Infinite.
of yes and no. Actually, we'll get to that.
It did for me because I never finished
That'll be
it.
the last essay. Sure.
So you didn't need narrative closure for Infinite.
Well, I want to get there.
You
at
didn't need
some
it, but
point.
they gave it to you kind of anyway.
No, I was just talking about like generally speaking, because
Sure.
even with films and so forth, that's more the exception and not the rule. But in video games, I would see that we'll talk more about it when we get to Infinite.
Sure. So go on about the Little Sisters.
I will say that there was a section of this essay about the Little Sisters, and the argument that they make is kind of fallacious, I think.
Yeah.
So they, the author, who's the author of this one?
Roger. Sorry, I have his name. Real quick.
Travis.
Roger Travis.
Roger Travis. He says that both choices are equal,
They are
but they're not.
mechanically. See, that's the kind of.
But they're not. The correct choice is saving them
Maybe
because it gets you better stuff.
No, that's not true though.
Mm,
Here, allow me to.
it is. You
disagree with
get bonuses for that.
No, here's what the whole point. The whole crux of this lies upon this, and this is from the article. Famously, to make the quote evil choice and harvest the Little Sisters, and to make the good choice to save them, end up functionally equivalent within the game mechanics.
Well, that's what he says, but
Because
that's
the loss
what
of
I'm
that-
arguing against.
Well, you can't argue against that.
You
Like,
get slightly. What is it? You're harvesting. I forget what it's called.
the atom. So
Yeah,
you get slightly
you get
less
slightly-
by saving them, but every 3 you save, you get a bonus from
Right.
Tannenbaum.
and
which
those bonuses end
equates
up being
to-
worth more
No, it's equal.
for sure.
It is absolutely equal.
All right,
I thought you gained some plasmids as well with.
that's what you
saving.
get.
You
Those
can
are the
get them
bonuses, right?
earlier, I
think.
believe.
I think those
All
are the bonuses.
Sorry.
So, like,
Regardless, go on. I see. I know your argument. Go ahead.
doesn't matter whether or not they're equal. The idea in this essay is that they are equal, and the idea becomes
It becomes the running
That-
your choice meaningless.
that
Yes.
no matter whether you pick good or bad, and I think this was what they were going for in the game, whether you pick good or bad, whether you pick to kill them or save them, that it's going to end up meaningless in the end. But
Doesn't matter, yeah.
but the problem is that, not the problem, but what the game does is that they're not actually equal because you get different endings depending on whether or not you save them.
Yes. Okay. That's
kill them.
a true point. Sure. I'm just saying, like, famously, as he says, mechanically, they are in fact equal. You just don't know that going into it.
And perhaps while we're in this section, we should explain a little bit about why this is equated to Plato's Cave
Sure.
in this
That's a
essay.
good call.
Scott, I don't know if you want to take that over or
Sure. Well, Ian and I can probably split it up. So, the Plato's Cave famous example is, imagine that your entire worldview is limited to sort of a shadow play, right? So, shadows going across the cave is your entire reality. If somebody escapes in that reality, goes up and sees, in quotes, the real reality, and tries to come down and explain that, hey, everything you think you know and are living is false. Like, that's sort of what Bioshock is kind of like saying to you in general, like viewed through the lens of this medium.
Yeah, but to quote Upright Citizens Brigade, it's someone trying to show you the bucket of truth.
yeah.
And some people can look at
I already
there
know
like,
that.
Yeah, I already know that.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, that's funny. That's true. Like, yeah, it's going to depend on how versed you are, I guess.
The other part of Plato's Cave is that I think is pretty important to this argument is that there's someone who gets outside of the cave and they come back and try to explain what
Right.
outside
And
is
get
to everyone else, and they
ostracized.
are completely ignored or exactly ostracized because of it, because they're trying to get outside of this, and that's kind of
Sure. So it's like
the idea of
culture
playing
defines
this game is
your
like
existence.
you are not allowed to break out of what the idea of this game is while you're inside of it. So, like, as long as you're inside the
Yeah,
game,
that's true.
you can't get outside of it, and that's the whole point of, like, you can't fail. You are not allowed to fail to press this, to abort the self-destruct sequence.
But to me, it seems a kind of a moot point if you study. You can, if you come to a part in a book, you can stop reading that book. If you come to a part in a movie, you can just stop watching that movie. The issue is that, in any kind of medium, you're defined by the rules set up in that medium. And whether it's more interactive or not, it's still a narrative. And yeah, I guess you
And it
could
still
have
has
things
that
like
chains. Yeah, sure. I get it.
Second Life, I suppose, or like is the one of the more free
There's a
ones where you can
narrative to
go
that,
do
though.
what you
Well,
want.
there's all
but
kinds of
it's-
sandbox games, too, that are more free than, this is a game that's on rails.
Yes.
Kind of,
Yeah.
essentially. But like he just raised that point where something like GTA or Skyrim, something like that. Yes, you have more freedom, again,
But you
in
don't.
quotes, in general, but you still are going to follow a narrative, as you were saying. Yeah, exactly.
It's
Right.
not like you can in Skyrim can settle down and be a farmer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You still have to save the world from dragons.
Well, it's
etc.
more of like you're talking about, like you said, Second Life or even like Minecraft. those types of games, those types of really open world games where you can just do whatever the heck you want as long as it's allowed by the rules of the game.
Sure. Yeah, which you're right, which does tie, like, that's the biggest tie into the Plato's Cave analogy and so forth. But I just thought it was an interesting one to point that out, and it made me think more about, like, again, even having been a huge fan about it and thinking about it a lot, that point got to me. It was interesting.
My issue with this, the Plato's Cave, and with the thing before is, I feel like not everyone's sitting around saying, "Oh, what I'm seeing is reality." And when all of a sudden Bioshock comes along, I'm like, "Guess what? You're playing a video game." Now, some people are like, "Oh, I am playing a video game." Other people are like, "Yeah, I know."
I understand.
And
right.
it
It's
kind
going to
of
depend upon that, of how much impactful it is.
I think that's simplifying the big reveal, though. It's not that you didn't realize you were playing a video game. It's not that you didn't realize that you're...
I think simple people think it to be bigger.
Hopefully none of our listeners are simpletons.
Parasites think it, but I guess.
But
I see your point, cynically.
That's not really the reveal. The reveal is the fact that despite the fact that you know you're playing a video game, you still do it. And you still get sucked into it. You're still gonna, like, Ian, you have talked many times on this show about loving trophies and not being able to give up on trophies.
But we're not talking about trophies.
And that's
we're talking
but
about,
it's a similar thing.
I am a slave to trophies.
Exactly, it's a similar thing. Like, yes, you realize that, but at some point
that's my source of validation.
At some point while you're playing, you're like, I have to get all these trophies.
Here's the thing is, like, narrative though.
But
when I go to play a video game,
but that's what it's pointing out.
For a narrative, and I appreciate Bioshock's narrative. I appreciate it being unique and different, and again, getting rid of the smoke and mirrors and saying, like, yeah, it comes down to you pressing X or you pressing triangle. It's no different. This game is no different than Pong. In the core basic tenets of how a game runs, we just have a better story. And I think that's it's
an important point.
It's a much more powerful narrative device than necessarily a meta commentary device.
All right, I like that distinction, and I will agree with it at the end of the day. I think,
that's where I come down to.
I think it's still impactful either way.
Oh no, I thought that Steve-O's explanation of Plato's Cave with regard to Bioshock and what you guys are talking about says a lot more than the article, because I thought the Plato's Cave thing was kind of tenuous at best.
You're saying we're better philosophers? Yes.
Yeah, probably.
I'll take credit on that.
I mean, just in terms of like putting it together and being succinct.
I'm an armchair
about
philosopher.
it and putting it, when you put it in context with the game, it makes more sense. Because if you put it outside the game, I'm with Ian. I'm like, I'm reading the Plato Cave thing. I'm like, everybody knows unless you're like, kind of delusional anyway, in which case,
that's the whole point.
Everything is, I was kind of trying to figure out what the whole thing with Plato's Cave is, because he kept bringing up the example. I'm like, I still don't see what you're saying, so thank you, Steve-O, and thank you, Ian, because you guys said more in your sentences than I think you did.
We're both living in Plato's Cave and in Rapture, obviously. All right, so let's move on to the third essay, which is called Propaganda, Lies, and Bullshit in Bioshock's Rapture by Rachel McKinnon. And I picked this one out because it has less to do with Bioshock itself, per se, than the framework of the speeches, I guess I want to say, like the language of it.
And this is probably why I like this one the best, to be honest.
I think this is my favorite one, too.
Yes, I agree.
It's a really good one. And I know, Ian, you're a big fan of the philosophy of language. Mm-hmm. So would you like to sort of give a quick synopsis and explanation?
Okay, I don't have the book in front of me, so I'm going straight from memory, but let's try this out. Let's see how much I can get into lying bullshit. And,
right. Bullshit us right now.
So the idea is that there are several types of different types of propaganda you can have. One is lying, is when you are when you're saying something that you know is false and attempting to make the other person think is true, as the standard definition of lying. Mm-hmm. However, this concept of quote-unquote bullshit is the idea that you speak so much that you don't know the difference between truth and falsehood.
You start to lose the distinction.
Yeah. Because the idea of the validity of what you're saying is not important. It's more of you'll use anything you can to propagate in your propaganda that truth that you want. So all of a sudden you lose the ability to distinguish between truth and falsity.
Exactly.
Did I give a good?
You did, and if I can, I took some
main point.
I took some notes on this one, so let me just. So the lying thing was put forth, at least credited in this article, to someone named Jennifer Saul, who basically said lying is only when the speaker believes herself to be speaking
knowingly
falsehoods.
Knows that it's false.
Yeah, exactly. And then Harry Frankfurt is the one that wrote the article on bullshit, which is basically when the speaker does not care whether something is true or false.
And a great show by Penn and Teller.
Indeed.
Sure.
So I think that where this article comes down is that propaganda is more closely related to bullshit than
Yes.
lying. The idea
She arrives
that
at that conclusion.
the idea that it literally
eventually.
doesn't matter. Like, telling the truth can be just as effective as telling a lie as long as it gets people to believe the same thing that you believe.
I was thinking of, when I was reading this, I was really excited about it because it reminded me of a story when I was living at my grandparents' house going to school, and there was like a Fox News thing about Fox News
News is engaging in bullshit?
Yeah, they're engaging in bullshit. No, we weren't watching Fox News, but there was a story about like how they were like saying, Capper's It's a Wonderful Life, commie propaganda film, and blah 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 blah. And I'm there with my and I'm there with my grandparents, and my grandfather was in the Merchant Marine in World War II, South Pacific, and they went through all that. And then I said, I'm like, how can they say that? Capra made all those propaganda films for the United States. My grandparents both looked at me and like, they weren't propaganda films. And I said, just because,
it's very telling, of
just
course,
because you agree with them, just because they may be quote unquote right, because battling Hitler is like a no-brainer, doesn't make them any less propaganda films. Oh boy, were they pissed off at me. But I thought it was a really great example
Sure. If you agree with the message, of course, then you're not going to be aware it's propaganda per se.
Not even that you won't be aware that it's propaganda, but that you
are buying into it.
Don't care if it's propaganda.
Well, I mean, if you look at, because I'm not going to,
you literally don't care whether it's true or false. That's the thing. Yeah.
Because in World War II, it was like a different situation. I mean, it was like, it was like a very emotional time. It really changed.
This is not an argument we should have right now.
No, I mean,
the world had basically, really changed the United States, the way we viewed the world, us in relationship to the world, and blah, 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 blah. There's too many factors to go into it. But it was a really big time for patriotism. And look, even Johnny's getting into the act by collecting cans for that could be made into a tank and get made into bullets.
When you drive alone, you drive with Hitler.
You drive with Hitler, yes, obviously.
Was this trip really necessary? Yes. Yeah. Oh, when you drive alone, when you drive with Hitler.
Yeah. Classic.
So it was
just... it's all of that. Sure, I get it. Like, you're right. Like, so the thing is, I'll tie it back in. She ties in a lot of Andrew Ryan's speeches, which of course I'm a big fan of his.
Yes.
Of his.
Please read some of, or
yes.
just recite them
because
from memory.
I
know you know them from memory.
I can recite most of them from memory, but not his speeches per se. She cites one, and then I think the framing point of this essay is that even Andrew Ryan admits that he himself may have convinced.
This is a very good point.
May have been convinced of his own propaganda to the point where he cannot easily determine what is true and what is false. If propaganda, or more like lies, then one can simply disbelieve one's own propaganda to arrive at the truth. But what makes it so troubling, that is that it's more like bullshit. It becomes increasingly difficult to tell the difference between truth and falsity, and after engaging in enough of it, even the overriding entity may, in fact, lose the ability to tell the difference.
Yeah, she gives a very good example She gives a very good example from the game. I don't know if it's right there or not in front of you.
Yes, it is. I mean, I can read it for you if you want.
Please do. I love that example.
Andrew Ryan's quote is, "Could I have made mistakes? Well, one does not build cities if one isn't guided by doubt. But can one govern in absolute certainty? I know that my beliefs may have elevated me, just as I know that things I've rejected would have destroyed me. But the city is collapsing before my very eyes. Have I become so convinced by my own beliefs that I have stopped seeing the truth? Perhaps. But Atlas is out there, and he aims to destroy me and destroy my city. To question is to surrender. I will not question."
Yeah, that idea of being too far gone is like brilliant.
But it's when you actually study the idea of self brainwashing in a way.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that when you're presented with facts that counter to the points that you will reject those facts, and not only will you reject them, but you'll strengthen your opinion that you have. So like, it's not even. Yeah, Andrew Ryan's an example of someone who's way too far gone, but it can happen in everyday life.
Sure, it absolutely can. But what I love about this game is that he is self-aware that he is too far gone, and the fact that they point that out, I think, is kind of brilliant. Sure. Like on the writer's part, the fact that they say that Andrew Ryan has this whole monologue.
He knows himself.
He has this whole monologue about how his own lies have become his truth, and yet he can't go back on it at this point.
If you want to go to the man versus slave, he could have stopped himself from getting murdered.
Right.
If he had given different, but he wanted to prove himself so correct.
Yeah.
That he
was so
basically
invested in that. Exactly.
Committed suicide in a sense.
He was martyring himself
Yeah.
for his
Yeah.
own cause.
And because he's so invested in this idea. He's a slave to his propaganda.
Exactly.
I will make perhaps an unpopular point here.
Oh, you always do.
I never really understood why Ryan kills himself. It does his point and his cause no good in the end. It helps him not at all.
Yes, it
I'll
does.
tell you why.
It absolutely doesn't. He has his city is turned to dust. He has no.
That's why he does it.
But he has it doesn't help his cause. It doesn't help his legend. You know.
May I? Because
Sure.
he dies with the ultimate blame laid upon Atlas. He
I
dies, but here's the thing: is he never has to come to face the fruition of his decisions, which destroyed his city. He dies by an agent of Atlas. Though he could have stopped it, he is killed, and he dies knowing that he was maybe not. He was a victim. He dies the victim. He doesn't die
Sure,
the root.
But I know, sure, yes, I get that part of it. Like, I get that that's why you're supposed to believe that he did that.
Mm-hmm.
But I never saw him as a character as being that wrapped up in his own beliefs or that wrapped up in anything, really.
But,
I feel like he was
nothing-
self-interested over everything.
He does nothing but
wrapped up in his own
but
beliefs. I would
sit
say.
at a radio and elucidate to people.
No, that's
constantly.
not true.
It's like
that is absolutely not true. It's
No.
not that he does nothing but that. It's just
No,
that
he
that's
does
all you
nothing
know of
but
him. The fact is that you don't really you look at him and you see somebody. At least I looked at him while I was playing the game, and I saw someone that was more self-interested than anything else. And the fact that he kills himself by means of the brainwashed protagonist seemed a really strange thing to me. And don't get me wrong, I loved it. I thought it was a great twist. But at the same time, I was in the back of my mind, and perhaps I never even until now allowed myself to
Just realizing it now.
really think about it. But I'm always why would he? In the back of my mind, I was why would he just kill himself? He did that. He could have ordered him to do anything. He could have taken you as a protagonist and made you his fucking murder slave, basically.
Ooh, I want one of those.
Yeah, well, you could get one if you go to
Would
Bioshock.
you kindly?
He made himself the true hero for his cause.
He wasn't though. Who was he the
but
hero
no,
to?
check this
in his
out.
own mind is what
No,
you're going to say.
there's a Babylon 5 episode called "Comes the Inquisitor," and he's
Deep pull.
No, but the whole point of the thing is that if you're going to lead an army, I mean, why are you doing what you're doing? Are you doing it for the glory that you can go down in a blaze of glory and everybody's going to sing songs about you? Or are you willing to make the sacrifice where you're going to go unremarked, unremembered, that you're just, how far are you into your cause? How strong is your belief? So while I think there's part of Andrew Ryan that was so strong in him that, part of him was doing it for martyr, but, maybe part of him was giving up, and it was the most honorable way to give up. But part of him may have thought that, he is such a true believer for his cause that he will make this sacrifice, die with his belief, even if it means that he goes unremarked.
Sure, I guess. But
I think that the strongest argument to why he did that is the part that you just read earlier, Scott, is the fact that he at one point, and only one point, says that perhaps he is too far into his own beliefs to turn back now. That he just, in the moment, decides that to turn back would be death anyway, and that he just has to go forward with his own death.
I take it as both. All right, here's my final commentary upon that I've always got out of it. It's that, and also it's the final fuck you to you as the player / the protagonist.
Right.
He's choosing. He's proved that he could do otherwise, but he's making you do it because that's his blaze of glory, if you will.
So
he's so far
This
gone.
is perhaps the problem, that I see it only as a meta-narrative device and not necessarily a narratively
I just provide you with a narrative.
understandable device. I still don't see...
He's Kim Jong-un on Radio Ho Chi Minh.
Except for Kim
screaming that
Jong-un would
everything
never
is
kill
fine.
himself. Kim
As
Jong-un would
He
never
would if it
kill
would
himself.
make him be a hero.
Not a chance in the world. No,
But
What?
Andrew Ryan,
absolutely not.
Andrew Ryan wanted to hide away from the rest of the world. He was looking for internal glory, not external glory. He wanted whatever was a
Sure.
megalomania. He wanted his own. So
Subtle difference,
since
perhaps,
there was
but
nobody else left to impress, he had to, he died because nobody's gonna fucking remember him. He doesn't want the outside world to know of Rapture, so he is going to die unremarked.
Sure.
So for whatever his reason was, there was no glory
we
in
can
his
conjecture
death.
as much as we want, but what's there is there. And I think the article does a good job of pointing at the fact that, yes, he eventually became, it's obvious that he was so far gone, he bought his own bullshit, if you will.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the troubling thing about the slippery slope, if you will, in terms of language of that sort.
Well, I'll tell you this, for philosophy of Bioshock 2, I'm going to write an article about how Andrew Ryan killing himself was completely against his personality.
I'm going to laugh when it's rejected.
Wait, the philosophy of Bioshock 2 is in Bioshock 2 the game?
No, as in,
No. The philosophy
We're
of...
going to append these essays. Yes.
Oh, okay. Because I was going to say the philosophy of Bioshock 2
perhaps
is
we should
why
call it
did
the
you make-
second philosophy of Bioshock.
Well, we'll think of a cover title later on.
Bioshock 2, the cash cow.
But let's go on to the final essay, which is Infinite Lighthouses, Infinite Stories, Bioshock and the Aesthetics of Video Game Storytelling by Steve-O, if you can help me out with the pronunciation of the author.
I'll probably butcher this as well,
Right.
but I'm Ian. This guy's Hungarian. You and I are Hungarian. His name is László Kajtár.
Cool.
Is that correct?
All on you,
Is
buddy.
it correct? I have no
I'm
idea.
just trying to
I
be,
apologize in
that's-
advance.
I'm trying to be as accurate as possible.
That's as close as I can get, having listened to my grandparents speak Hungarian to each other my entire childhood.
All right.
Lighthouses all the way down.
Yes, which kind of sort of is the onset of this article. So yeah, it focuses on Infinite specifically as sort of a broad example or exemplary of how the medium itself can explain and ingrain itself into telling you. There are many avenues to tell stories. It's almost like sort of a defense of video games as art, which
Yeah, that's
I
exactly
kind of
what
did
it
it,
is. That's what I
and the
took
thing
it
is,
as.
again, we already, all of us here assume that they already are a legitimate form of art. So, I kind of resented the fact, not resent, but it's a bucket of truth thing. Yeah, I already know their art.
It's
I don't
still-
need a defense
I like
of it.
the concept of the lighthouse and the
man.
and whatever when they do
the city.
Joseph Campbell style analysis. I
Right.
think they
It's
actually
an
reference
archetype,
Joseph Campbell.
Yeah.
He does mention that outright. That's
Which
true.
is the idea is that there's an infinite number of stories that could theoretically be in the Bioshock,
but they're always
universe.
based upon.
But they're all in a sense that idea of the hero embarking on the journey. That if you ever read The Hero with 1,000 Faces,
Yep.
Yeah.
that's basically they kind of build off a bit
Yes.
of this essay for
Exactly.
off that. Basically, the idea is that the Bioshock story, whether you're going into the sky for Columbia, whether you're going into Rapture, whether you're going to the Star Wars, the Death Star, or you're going whatever story you want to do, it all faces with the same archetypes of narrative. And I enjoy. I like Joseph Campbell. We're actually planning to do a narratology of him eventually.
Yeah.
But I like the idea of this kind of the archetypes that transcend just games and go into all narrative.
Right. Exactly.
And storytelling.
He speaks about John Dewey, who puts forth the idea that art is an aesthetic experience, not an object. And I think that's a very interesting thing. It's not something that you...
It's not static, I guess.
It's not perhaps something that you look at, but it is what you get when you look at it.
But how do
It's
they define aesthetics here?
I mean, it's
Vaguely.
Yes,
No,
it's
but
perhaps not well defined, but the idea...
It's
Well,
the
that's the
study
whole
of
point.
art.
The idea is that art is completely about how you feel when you view art or see art or whatever. It's not about what that object
because
is.
it's all defined recursively here. The idea is that art. What is art? It's something that's perceived as art. That's basically what they're saying. It's how they define it, and I don't agree. I think that there's a much more fundamental.
You think there's a definition of art?
Yes, there is, and I could go.
What is
onto
it? Is it not? Is it a?
I
it-
Well,
I
because
don't
the
think that
the definition of art and what art is, and to everybody is subjective anyway. So, I mean, it really is.
Of course. So
Are you talking about like the common visceral reaction, regardless of what the art is, or?
Well, allow
I
me to
think
adjust some of
this is a rabbit hole for another
Yes.
time.
But hold on. I think what the argument here is, not to go down in the rabbit hole. I'm not going
Let's
to.
just
But
go
I think
around the
what I
rabbit
think
hole.
what the argument is that art is not what you're looking at. It's not like, oh, that book is art. What art
You're saying it's an experience,
is how
not
you
an object.
feel
Yes.
about whatever you're looking at.
I get that.
And
So-
that's the true art. It's not about the object. It's
So
about
is
what
every-
that
so
object
is-
makes you feel.
So is it the connection? Is it the set of every person art everything that someone experiences is art?
Yeah, art is completely subjective
more
according to
so
your experience.
the
Yes.
other, I
So
That's what he's saying.
The murder of children is art because some person
To somebody
used that
who
as an
loves
experience.
murdering
But
children,
no, but,
yes.
but is
like,
that
that's,
in the
that's
set
the
of
point.
art as defined as? Like, that's the problem. Is I don't think that you can define it completely as a subjective thing.
Why not?
There has
You
to be
can-
an objective
I think
definition
you can-
for it.
I don't
Yeah,
think so.
allow me to try to rectify some of this by the essay's own words and to tie it into No Carol.
By the way, I'm
we
sorry to
discussed.
interrupt you, but I do not condone the murder of children.
All right, thanks. Just as
I just believe that some children murderers could view it as art.
just as an aesthetic value. Sure.
I do
Right.
condone the
All right.
murder of.
So
Great.
in this section, he writes, No Carol, who we have discussed, argues that art shouldn't be defined by essential qualities or conditions. Instead, if we can tell a coherent story about how a particular work descends from the tradition of other works, as you were saying, E, about the Joseph Campbell thing, then we have a good chance of saying, yes, this qualifies as art.
I don't like that definition either, though.
Well, what definition you want? Like,
What's your definition of art?
Yeah, this is a
Ian?
huge rabbit hole. You're right. I'm just
Okay.
saying, I'm trying to tie it back.
It's the family. It's called the family
You have
resemblance.
infinite IPs.
That the idea that things such as games, things such as art, things such as language, which cannot be defined by a simple element,
Right.
are more of. It's almost like what we're doing with Bart.
Mhm.
Was the idea is that with his view of narrative, which is the idea that there are threads that are tied, and it's not the disjunction necessarily of, because not everything that is painted is an art painting that is to be considered art. But the idea it's this threads combined together, and
I think
that
that's
there's a
entirely
connection.
subjective, though.
But the idea is it's the connection of these that define the greater thread that is considered art.
So wait,
It's a variation on set theory.
are you saying that not every painting is art?
No, not everything that is painted is a painting that is considered art. So, like a bench that is painted may have a mural on it and is considered art, but if it's painted white, it is not necessarily art.
I would say if any person considers it art, then it is art.
I feel that.
Well, that's the rabbit hole thing.
Yeah.
Why
I
are
think
you?
we are descending. You asked me
why
my-
are you? Why? I know I did. But like I'm arguing it now. Like that. Why are you why are you or anyone else? Not necessarily you, but like why is anyone the arbiter of what is art to a specific person? This wall that's painted beige, whatever terrible color of beige this is, could be art to somebody because it reminds them of something.
It's art to
and
no one.
the entire point of this article, or a portion of this article, is about the fact that if you feel something because of an object that you're looking at, that is the point of art. And that's what art is.
I was more reacting to what he had said about, like, you know, the gameplay versus the environment. Like the gameplay.
Oh yeah, we're talking about a game.
That's what I was
I
trying to
forgot
get
about
back
that.
to. Thank you, Chris, for bringing us back to that for sure.
Because he's talking about, like, yeah, the gameplay is all right, it's fairly routine, but what's interesting about these games, and just using Infinite, is the fact that it's a world it's an engaging world that you want to explore, that you want to be a part of.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you've got a city in the ocean, a city in the clouds, things that you want to explore that, you know, where it was more limited in the first Bioshock. In Infinite, you had a better chance, and in Burial at Sea, to actually go back to where you'd been before, go look at what's there. There's a whole world to see. It's a complete world, even if it's a finite world. And, you know, he was saying between that and the storytelling, it's more than gameplay, the aesthetically it's art because of the environment, because of what they did with what they had. I mean, as opposed to, like, you know, any post-apocalyptic game that comes out. Okay, we're going through another ruined city. Great. Fantastic. But what makes things unique is the environments that they've created.
But to Stephen's point, that has nothing to do with it because someone considers it art, so it's art, and someone considers it not art, so it's not art.
But I think
So
that's
everything in the world
But
is
I think
art
that's
and not
basically
art.
what he was referring to.
Perhaps
There's
everything is
no-
a quantum state of art
That's
and
all
not
a
art.
huge proposition. Like again, this could be its own neophytes narratology episode. But I would like to somewhat rein it back in, and
All right.
I'll read one quote
Let's get back
that I
on
think
topic.
sort of is getting at what I wanted to talk about. He writes, the main problem here is that it's hard to tell a good story when the audience can influence the story. In terms of video games, I think is a good point. This is the reason video games sometimes must take control out of the hands of the players for example, in the form of cutscenes. If you had the freedom, I think this is funny, like if you played Infinite, if you had the freedom to interact with when Booker is killed by the many alternate versions of Elizabeth, then you might run away or kill Elizabeth or two. Which, as you said, would have been funny, but it would have significantly reduced the intellectual impact that Bioshock Infinite attempts, which I think is, again, like a more solid point.
I think it's kind of reductionist
in that
stuff.
sense.
Well, no, because I kind of
Yes,
have, that's a
I
problem
get
I
it,
have
but-
with like the bigger sandbox games, because like,
He goes on
like-
to say that very same thing.
yeah, and I agree with them, because if you have a game like,
He says this is even. Sorry, before you go on, Chris.
No.
He says this is the same even with sandbox games like GTA or Skyrim. Even though you have much more freedom to do as you please, to follow the main quest line and main storyline, things simply have to happen as they are preordained.
yes, depending on what storyline you follow, which
Yes.
is why like games to me, like, yeah, I'm a sucker for like the Bioshock games, but when you have that big of a sandbox, I get so lost in the world that I get bored and don't even care about the main
Sure. And
storyline. But when you have a game like, and why we keep coming back to Bioshock and Red Dead and Mass Effect is because they've got these big worlds, more so in the latter two, but they're focused. Like they do force you to go back to the main storyline.
Right, you're
It's
following
niche.
a narrative.
Yeah, and I think I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because you ultimately do have a story to tell. Otherwise, you are creating like a Minecraft or some, or
Sure, or something like that. Sure. So at the end of the day, like, and even though, like, yes, this article points out a couple of things that, again, that we sort of are glaringly obvious, but I think it's helpful to think about that. I appreciate the fact that it attempts to be ostensibly a defense of video games as art, which is fine. I'll always be okay with that.
Yeah.
Even though I don't think it needs to be defended at this point. But that's fine. And B, it points out that, yeah, Bioshock Infinite itself sort of shows you that there are many stories to be told, even though if maybe they sort of can be traced back to the archetypal stories that we are familiar with.
Yeah, but there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah,
Because
exactly. I agree.
if it's true that Joseph Campbell's theories are true, then there's no
Then, in
other
fact,
way
there is
for
nothing
it
else to do. Yeah.
It's
It's just that this
it's going to be infinite lighthouses and infinite
right.
man.
There's always going to be a
approaching
man, a city, and a lighthouse,
Yeah.
and you can tell an interesting story like based on those like sort of basic elements, if you will, like the building blocks, the atoms of a story, I guess.
Yeah.
So I guess that's basically the closing off essay about this, and there are a couple other essays that, like, these aren't the only four, obviously, but there are a bunch of others in this book that I think are interesting that maybe we'll touch upon in other episodes. But these are the four that I think that sort of are like the pillars.
I'll put this up on our Goodreads page.
Yeah.
I'll put this as one of the books
Sure.
that we've read. By the way, on Goodreads we have a list of all the books that we've gone through. I'll put a link to
And
that.
you
as
can
well.
read
They're
them
not
all.
all Goodreads.
They're just things we have read, that is to say. But for now, I think we'll
SC notwithstanding, I'm sorry.
I think we'll be entering our old lighthouse and a man in the city. I, of course, am Scott Thurlow, joined by Janine Manzer,
And good night.
Chris Morgan.
if I create art, is it not my art to create?
Obviously, it is.
I'll
And
be the judge of
and
that.
Stephen Amosa, yeah, we'll be the judge of it. Chris.
I'll see you later.
All right. See you in the next Infinite Universe. Good night.
This has been Syntax Error. Thank you as always for listening, and we will see you next time.
Music by Stephen Armosi. Editing and engineering by Scott Thurlow.
Syntax Error is part of a Lost Signals Productions. All rights reserved.